Since the beginning of this decade, we have become aware that some of our men and women can be deeply affected by what they experience during highly stressful operational mission. Indeed, some have had trouble readapting to everyday's life once they return home. This video was put together as a training aid to show how one mission in particular affected our personnel and how they have coped with this ordeal. As you watch this video, keep in mind that recognizing the effect of stress after many years can be obvious. But learning how to recognize the symptom of stress-related disorder during or shortly after an event is much more difficult. We must get better at recognizing this ailment, and we must assist those who suffer from it on the road to recovery.
Civil war erupted today in the African state of Rwanda after a plane carrying the Rwandan president was apparently shot down in the capital of Kigali last night on its way back from peace negotiations in Tanzania. This attack triggered Hutu extremists to begin systematic massacres of the Tutsi minority in Rwanda and of moderate Hutu sympathizers. It's estimated that thousands have already been butchered in their homes, churches, and in the streets. United Nations peacekeeping forces already in Rwanda under the command of Canadian General Romeo Dallaire are helpless to intervene in the massacres. Their current mandate permits self-defense, but does not allow them to engage either the Hutu government forces, known as the RCAF, or the Tutsi rebels, fighting as the Rwandan Patriotic Front. All the UN soldiers can do is watch.
Maybe I'll have a chance to tell the story of witnessing everything that we were seeing. And so I think that became a bit of a vocation, you know, that we were literally witnessing the mass slaughter of human beings, and that would become in itself a mandate for us.
Within weeks of the plane crash in April 1994, most of the 2,500 soldiers who were serving in the UN forces in Rwanda pulled out, leaving just a few hundred to keep the headquarters in Kigali functioning. Only a few Canadians were there for the early fighting, but over the next 6 months, the Canadian government would send over several hundred soldiers on specific missions. Many had only a vague idea of what they were in for. Learning to deal with the horrors of life on the ground in Rwanda, training themselves to expect the unexpected, coping with the bloody chaos that surrounded them at each moment would take its toll on every single soldier. These are some of their stories.
Can 46763, I copy your remarks. Report 25 DME from Kigali.
I landed in Kigali airport in a beautiful sunny day, with the sound of gunfire off in the distance, sporadic gunfire. Landed at an airport that was in utter chaos. There wasn't a pane of glass left. There was shattered glass and debris of one kind or another everywhere. The runway, I remember, was very short, and our time on it was very short. We were essentially ejected off the Herc very quickly, and get left before we had time to have a second thought about where we were and what we were doing there. I guess that the predominant emotion with me was one of curiosity. I could hear the gunfire. I could smell the death. Very strong smell of rotting meat of one kind or another all over the city. But it wasn't until sundown that it really hit home where I was. As soon as the sun went down, the gunfire increased. And as the night went on, we had heavier and heavier calibers of weaponry used. And then through the night, there were packs of dogs that started to fight over the corpses, I guess, of the previous day's killing. But you could hear these dogs moving about in packs and yowling and snarling at each other through the night. And that's when it hit home where I was.
As the war weeks stretched into months, the remaining UN soldiers quickly ran out of essentials and came to rely on the daily flight of a Canadian Herc for resupply. Pinned down in Kigali, all they could do was defend themselves and some of the local population.
Well, we had about 30,000 of them that we were protecting, and we were moving them between the lines. And they were dying in our care because we had no water or food or medical supplies. I mean, we were protecting them from the other side, but they were dying as we were protecting them. I had soldiers going sick because they couldn't eat or drink because they simply couldn't do it with so many people with nothing around them.
The war stretched on for over 3 months. By the end, almost 1 million people had been slaughtered and about 1.5 million displaced. As the massacres wound down, help poured in from around the globe. The Canadian government sent a field ambulance unit from CFB Petawawa to provide medical support for hundreds of thousands of displaced Rwandans on their journey home. Within seconds of touching down, these soldiers would find that doing business in Rwanda was nothing like it was at home.
We arrived, it was late, we flew over the airport, there were no lights in the cities, there were no lights in the airport, so all of a sudden we realized we had reached our destination, but it was like diving into a big black hole. We had no idea what we were getting into. Landed at the airport, got on these buses that were waiting for us, driven by the locals. They were locally hired buses. They had bullet holes in the windows, they were in really, really decrepit shape, and as we were leaving the airport down the road, there were areas where the security people that were with us pointed out where there were actually RPA or soldiers in the bushes watching us go by, though we couldn't see them. So we had a first taste of that right away when we got off the plane.
The unit set up in an abandoned milk factory, about 3.5 hours away from Kigali. They had limited security and were cut off from Kigali by dozens of checkpoints. On a routine trip to collect water one day, a small team of hospital staff, escorted by a couple of soldiers for Defense and Security, DNS, ran into a dangerous reminder of just how isolated they were.
This goes back to where we weren't aware of the culture, and in Rwanda, women are not respected greatly. In our mission, a medical mission, there's a lot of females in the medical mission. We didn't really pay much attention to this fact. Things had been going fairly smoothly up to this point. We sent a female Med-A out with the debt that went out that day. And when they came back, they were visibly upset, and we had discussed with them what had happened, and a couple of the RPA had come out of the bushes while they were doing their task and offered initially a chicken for the female Med-A. And at first it was treated as a joke, but these people were very serious. And it progressed to the offer of a chicken, a cow. I'm not too sure, but the livestock value increased for this person. And our DNS guys had to step in and attempt a liaison, not necessarily a show of force, and a liaison because more and more of the RPA came out of the bushes. And it was through sheer negotiation that our people were able to get away. So when they got back into camp, we discussed it with them, and at that time we decided that we would not be sending females out on any of these missions anymore. It just became too dangerous.
During the summer of 1994, the Canadian government also sent a signals regiment from CFB Kingston to set up a communications network for the growing UN force. But getting their systems up and running in the backcountry of Rwanda tested both their skills and their resolution.
Mount Karungi was really, really cold at night, to the point where we got snowfall. And it was an eye-opener itself here in Africa, standing in a hole in the ground, and it's snowing on you. We knew that Rwanda was a mountainous area. We had tested our systems back in Canada in a lot of similar geographical places, but it was still a challenge in itself because it was really mountainous. And basically Mount Karungi was set up as a relay station to take the communications from the base of one of the mountain and send it over the top to another location, Kigali itself. I remember one day we were up in the mountain, we were going to a place called Kubuye, and we were traveling along the mountainside, which was in itself quite an adventure because you're looking down the face of this mountain and there's no guardrails to stop you from falling over the edge. And we come across a roadblock, which was typical. There was roadblocks everywhere, and they always asked for a cigarette, and a lot of us didn't smoke. So we were explaining to them that we don't have a cigarette to give. And I looked over my shoulder, being in the crew commander's hatch, I looked over my shoulder and I had an RPG pointed at my vehicle. And when you have a 13 or 14-year-old with an RPG pointed at you, you got to wonder, a lot of things go through your mind. Is he trained enough? Is the weapon working? Will he fire? What will cause him to fire? So there's a lot to take into consideration when you're at a roadblock.
Driving alone to the airport one day, on a route he took regularly, Corporal Kazavoy spotted a group of soldiers running out to his vehicle, waving at him. Used to this signal for help, he stopped, and that's when the trouble started.
So I stopped, got out of the vehicle, opened the door, and stepped out of the vehicle to see what was going on. And the moment I'd gotten out of the vehicle, one of their armored cars came and blocked the front of my vehicle, and they traversed the machine gun around, cocked it, and had it aimed at me. So I thought, okay, they don't need my help. And then a group of soldiers all came crowded up around me in the vehicle. So first thing I did was push myself back. So I'm standing in the doorway. My rifle was inside the vehicle. Didn't reach for it, just started following my training. Training is don't give them access to the vehicle or your weapon, and then just stay calm, see what's going on.
The soldiers kept shouting at him in their own language, refusing to speak French or English. Several times he tried to find out what the problem was, couldn't get anywhere, and decided to leave.
And when I said, okay, you obviously don't need me, I'm going to get in my vehicle and go, one of the soldiers cocked his AK and slammed against my forehead. So my forehead was up against the back of the vehicle, like the door frame of the vehicle, pressed against me, and I thought, okay, that was a bad idea.
Two men in civilian clothes showed up and joined the shouting, this time insisting in English that he get into their truck. But Kazavoy refused, offering instead to follow them to the UN headquarters to sort out whatever the problem was. They became more and more abusive.
Okay, I know I'm not carrying. The officer pulls back and gives me a full-handed slap. Just, I guess he put all his weight into it, and it just slapped against me and slapped my head into the rifle. And pretty high on adrenaline and everything. And all I could think when he slapped me was, what, that's as hard as you can hit me? And so I guess I smiled at him, because all I could think was, okay, you little person, here you've got me outnumbered, I was told later there were 16 people there, but I only saw, the people around me. But you got me outnumbered, and I got weapons pointed at me, and then you slapped me? Like, geez. So I smiled at him, and he didn't know how to handle that. I guess I was supposed to get angry and grab my weapon. And so he stepped back, and they talked for a second, then they just left. No comment, no nothing. They just left, got in the vehicle, drove off. That was hard. When I got back, I had shakes real bad and couldn't function for a day. Spent a week thinking that, okay, I'd done this wrong. If I'd just done the Rambo thing and gotten my weapon, I could have blah, 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 saved myself, been a hero.
Kazavoy beat himself up mentally about that incident for several days, until he learned that others had also been attacked and lost more than their weapons and their vehicles. To the UN soldiers in Rwanda, it seemed that driving around the country was becoming a most dangerous occupation.
We'd come down a hill. We're close to an area that we thought was the site of this massacre, and saw our first 2 human beings in about 20 minutes of driving. And we pulled up to stop, to ask for directions, and just as we pulled up, the whole world opened up on us. Roughly a platoon-size hit. What saved us was the fact that we'd pulled the vehicle in under a garden wall, and between us and the people shooting was a low garden wall and a house. So we sat there watching the bullets stitch off the top of this wall just over our heads. Now, there I was, fairly new to Africa, in a state of panic anyway, before we got hit. So I sat in my seat, very excited by all this, and I kept hitting my driver, Captain Appia was his name. Kept hitting him, saying, "Back up, back up." Fortunately, he ignored me. And I thought maybe he'd gone catatonic on me, but no. He waited until the first magazines had emptied. Then he backed up and nearly broke my neck in the process. He just floored it in reverse, right up a hill, an exposed hill, and kept going until we were over the lip of it.
In addition to their specific tasks, many of the Canadian troops found themselves assigned to the gruesome job of locating massacre sites and mass graves for the United Nations.
We went into a school, actually. That's where there was, they had all the children lined up. I guess their schools were like different grades. And they had all the children lined up. And it looked like they played a game with the children. Like they chopped their heads off. And then they'd sign their names. Like it was like a game. No, I'm okay. No, I'm okay. I gotta get this out. And I think, like, how can people do this to people? Like, I wasn't accustomed to this. Like, I've done my sentry duties. I've done out in the field, and I don't know.
One day, after spending 7 hours looking for a specific mass grave, Corporal Kazavoy left the officer he was with for a minute or two while he went to relieve himself.
So I step over a bump to get some privacy, and my foot sinks straight down. So I hear a lot of snapping like twigs and all that. And then all I could think about at the time was, God, I gotta clean the damn boots up again. So I looked down to pull my foot out, and I found that I was in the chest cavity of a body. So instead of doing the normal thing, just taking one step backwards to get out of there, I kind of leaped backwards, tripped, and rolled into the mass grave. I kind of had a freak out episode where you leap and get the hell out of there as soon as you can. So I scrambled out of there first chance to get, and I'm standing at the top, and I start yelling for the sir to come on over. I think I found what we need.
They went to churches they went there for comfort, because you expect the church. You're always brought up the church is going to protect you, and go there for asylum and that. And that's where a lot of the slaughters were done. We went to church and they were just riddled with bullets. Mothers clutching their babies, bodies half decomposed, and that was my biggest thing. I want to get home and make sure my kids are okay. That was my biggest effect.
UN forces in Rwanda continue to struggle this week, with hundreds of thousands of civilians displaced during the genocide who are refusing to leave refugee camps around the country. It's been several months since the civil war in Rwanda officially ended, but local governments and non-governmental organizations seem unable to convince these families and individuals that it is indeed safe to return home.
Early attempts by the UN to encourage the refugees to leave the camps were doomed to failure.
UN forces in Rwanda continue to struggle this week, with hundreds of thousands of civilians displaced during the genocide who are refusing to leave refugee camps around the country. It's been several months since the civil war in Rwanda officially ended, but local governments and non-governmental organizations seem unable to convince these families and individuals that it is indeed safe to return home.
Early attempts by the UN to encourage the refugees to leave the camps were doomed to failure. Hutu militants in the camps didn't want their countrymen returning to their homelands that were now being governed by Tutsis. Inevitably, at the Kibeho camp, the situation exploded into violence, and hundreds of thousands of refugees took to the roads trying to escape. Ethnic tensions were still very high, and the refugees were attacked as they fled. Major Lancaster headed for one of the camps to try to help, but never made it.
My car kept getting filled up with people who were cut off and being stoned on the road as they tried to transit villages. And I ended up near the end of the afternoon alone in this vehicle, with the vehicle already full of women and children that had been hit by incoming bricks and sticks and so on. When the head man of the group pointed the route had to go off the main road and uphill on a dirt road through a little village, my heart sank. It smelled like an ambush from half a kilometer away. And sure enough, when we got into this village, the first thing that started was the children went berserk. The village children came in running among the stragglers and hit everything that was standing up. The crowd grew closer and closer around me and started jumping on my vehicle as a way of getting away from the kids. When the village elders started to take a hand, throwing bricks and using bigger clubs, I pulled a couple of babies in off their mothers' backs to try and get them away from the bricks and to leave their mothers some sort of freedom of action. And it got worse and worse and worse, and I could see people going down in my rearview mirror, being clubbed, killed. And all of a sudden it stopped. 3 men had stepped out of the village, 3 village elders, I guess they were, with bigger clubs than everyone else, and they pushed everyone back and said, "Stop, this is not right." And there I was, wearing a blue beret, supposedly as a member of a world body with credibility and force and power and interest from the nation's people. All the best thinking in the world went into construction of the UN. And it didn't mean a damn thing at that time and place. The next day I got up with the intention of going back down to the trouble area and found I just couldn't move. Just couldn't get myself out the door. And I realized then that I'd had it. I just could not go on.
The madness of Rwanda would take its toll on everyone. General Dallaire, who'd lived all the horrors and helplessness of the last 8 months, became terribly at risk.
I had been targeted specifically by the Hutus to be killed. And that made negotiations and going through the lines difficult and so on. It also made it difficult for the other white guys because they were out to get the white people. About mid-July, I'd be running bombardments or ambushes, daring them. I had lost my sense of humor.
The Department of National Defense has announced that it's launching a series of studies to develop strategies to help Canadian peacekeepers deal with the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is an ailment soldiers who've served in difficult environments, such as Bosnia, Somalia, and Rwanda, may develop. It's a physical condition in which the chemical signals of the brain change, which can affect the soldier's behavior in theater and once they're back home. While doctors are optimistic that treatment programs can relieve many of the symptoms, much about the disorder is still unknown, and it can often take years for the effects of PTSD to show up and be recognized.
It's said that every soldier lives a different war. Certainly they each react differently to the stress and the trauma of surviving conflict. Simply talking about what they were seeing, doing, and living through in Rwanda was an effective way for many to deal with the mental strain.
But if you talk about it, you just share the wealth, more or less, and you get it out of your system, and you feel a lot better. you feel like that load's taken off your chest. And talking does help, big time. And I'd find myself sitting on my bed after working all day, sitting on my bed talking to the other soldiers and just more or less probing them. And at first, some of them wouldn't open up and talk, but after they listened to our conversation, they got more into it and more into it, to where all of a sudden now they wanted to put their 5 cents in on what they saw. And it seemed to relieve them after a while, and it got them through that day anyway.
It was encouraged every team after they finished their shifts. The team leader, either a nurse or the senior med-A on the team, sat down with their personnel for 20 minutes before the people were released, had them talk about what they saw, what they felt, what they thought they didn't do right or they could have done better, and just to try to get this out of the way so that it could be filed away.
Not everyone had such good support. Many were left feeling alone. For them, asking for help meant being labeled as weak or cowardly, a label that could eat away at a promising military career. So they bottled up the sights, the sounds, the smells, and the pain, and locked them away. But the horror never really disappears, and months or years later, the memories bubble to the surface. Some try to cope with the trauma of their experiences by themselves. Others go for counseling. Either way, there's no guarantee of relief.
It's nothing what I expected. I figured that, I'd do my job, it's my job as a medic to come back and I'd just carry on. But you couldn't carry on. It affected my wife, it affected me, my family. It was really hard. And there was no support there.
That's the worst thing, I think, of being a Canadian soldier, is that weakness is frowned upon. So the easiest thing to do is take everything, push it to the side, and pretend it was a movie. And it isn't until you get hit by smells, the smells are the worst, that'll trigger a memory. And then it's like a film starting up in your head. And either you can let it run through or you can push it back into that spot. There are foods I can't eat anymore. Grilled chicken, can't eat it. Looks like a dead body. There are vehicles that I see, like rusted vehicles. Can't go near them. Children have a hell of a time looking at little kids, especially newborns, because they were a plaything for the Hutus. They really like killing kids.
Well, I have not expounded on the treetops or the houses. But I have undergone 10 months of therapy. And it didn't hit me right away. It took nearly 2 years to all of a sudden not being able to cope, not being able to hide it, not being able to forget it or to put it keep it in the drawer. And I became suicidal because there was no other solution. You couldn't live with the pain and the sounds and the smell and the sights. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stand the loudness of silence. Sometimes I wish I'd lost a leg instead of having all those gray cells screwed up. You lose a leg, it's obvious. You've got therapy, you got all kinds of stuff. You lose your marbles. Very, very difficult to explain, very difficult to gain that support that you need. But those who don't recognize it and don't go to get the help are going to be a risk to themselves and to us. And if I hadn't have gone to get help, I would never have been promoted, because I probably wouldn't even be alive.
Treason!
These soldiers went to Africa expecting to keep the peace and to help a war-torn country build some stability. Instead, they found themselves immersed in hell on earth, caught as helpless witnesses to evil, to one of the most horrific genocides in human history. For some who served in Rwanda, their experiences have made them stronger, wiser, and keen to serve again. Others have been struck deeply by the horrors and visions and would be hard-pressed to go into another similar situation. Every tour is different, and into each mission, Canadian peacekeepers pour their courage, their strength, and their very souls. Their reward is a mixed blessing, a spirit scarred by the sadness and misery in the world around us, and a heart full of the knowledge that by being there, they made it a little better.
I am fiercely proud of being a Canadian soldier. There's nothing on earth I would rather be. And I'd love that I wore the blue beret. Pride isn't the word for it. And the good we did, my God, the lives we saved just by being there. The orphans we helped, the children that had maybe a couple years more life because we were around. There's no describing them. Like, I didn't feel that I'd completed my job as a Canadian soldier until I'd worn the blue beret. That medal is one of the proudest medals I wear. On the other side of it, it's the hardest one to wear, hardest one to put on.
Not everyone who has witnessed such horror may develop what is called post-traumatic stress disorder. But those who suffer from stress-related ailment are fully entitled to and deserve all the help they need to get back to their normal day-to-day life after they return from difficult tour of duty. The Canadian Forces provide you with the training to recognize the symptom before and after you deploy. Post-traumatic stress disorder is nothing to be ashamed of. Like so many other medical conditions, it can be treated. For more information on this disorder or to get professional help, contact your base medical unit, your unit doctor, or your supporting social work officer.